Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good evening, and welcome to our second From the Ashes We Rise town hall, where tonight we will continue the work of amplifying QPOC, LGBTQ+, and transgender, gender non-conforming, and non-binary voices and experiences so that our allies can listen and learn from those experiences to support LGBTQ+ individuals in the field. It's our mission of these town halls and subsequent special interest group meetings to burn down the systems of oppression that have degraded, excluded, harassed, discriminated, shamed, murdered, silenced, and savaged LGBTQ+ individuals, including but not limited to the social work profession. Rising above these ashes to build a new system of inclusion and justice, and while rising, recognizing the resiliency of the LGBTQ+ individuals who've persisted and existed and who still persist and exist despite these systems being in place. Our stories and our voices matter, and they deserve to be heard. We kindly ask that all those who identify as cisgendered and heterosexual remain muted throughout this town hall. If you want to acknowledge and support your colleagues, you may do so using the chat function. With that being said, please be mindful of what you are writing in the chat. In too many instances, LGBTQ+ experiences are often met with peers who try to invalidate their experiences, and this will not be a place to re-traumatize individuals. We also kindly ask that everyone identify their pronouns by hovering over your video, clicking on the 3 dots, selecting rename, and typing in your pronouns next to your name. We would also like to acknowledge that everyone is on their own individual journey. So if you are still discovering what your pronouns are and would prefer us to just use your name, please just put parentheses name in parentheses next to your name. We also want to acknowledge that this will be recorded for those who wanted to attend but were not able to tonight. So if you want to share but you don't feel comfortable with being recorded, please let us know in the chat and we can stop the recording so that you can still be able to share and we can restart afterwards. Before we go into the ground rules, we're going to open with a 30-second moment of silence to honor the LGBTQ+ individuals who've been targeted, discriminated against, and murdered due to fear and hate. In the past decade, there has been an increase in the rise of Black trans women being murdered, and 2021 has already been on track to surpass 2020 in the number of Black trans murders. And we're going to break that silence with the acknowledgement that we must do better, we will do better, and we will no longer be silent in the face of oppression. Our ground rules and the principles of our community, we recognize that we must strive to overcome historical and divisive biases such as racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia in our society. We acknowledge that we are all systematically taught misinformation about our own groups and about members of other groups, and this is true for everyone regardless of our groups. We agree not to blame ourselves or others for the misinformation we have learned, but to accept responsibility for not repeating misinformation after we have learned otherwise. We agree to listen respectfully to each other without interruptions. Only one person speaks at a time. However, this does not mean we should ignore problematic statements. We can and should address those statements with care and respect, with the goal of helping each other learn. We acknowledge that we may be at different stages of learning on the content and discussion topics. We agree that no one should be required to or expected to speak for their whole race, gender, identity, or sexual orientation. We can't, even if we wanted to. Everyone has come to the table to learn, grow, and share. We will trust that people are doing the best they can. We all make mistakes and have bad days. When these occur, let's challenge and encourage each other to do better. We acknowledge once again that we may be at different stages of learning on the topic. Share responsibility for including all voices in the discussion. If you have a tendency to dominate discussions, like me, take a step back and help the group invite others to speak. If you tend to stay quiet, challenge yourself to share ideas so others can learn from you. If you're exceedingly quiet, do expect that the facilitator will call on you in meetings to participate, or we might side ping you to see if everything's okay. We are experienced facilitators, but do not claim to be experts. We are here to help facilitate the process. Along with everyone in the group, we are here to learn. We also recognize that everyone has an opinion. Opinions, however, are not the same as informed knowledge backed up by research. Depending on the topic and context, both are valid to share, but it's important to know the difference. To engage in deep learning, we will want to lean more towards informed knowledge and gain practice reflecting and speaking thoughtfully on difficult topics. It's okay not to know. Keep in mind that we are all still learning and all bound to make mistakes when approaching a complex task or exploring new ideas. Be open to changing your mind and make space for others to do so as well. It is also important to acknowledge that LGBTQ+ individuals are not responsible to be your own personal Google. Tonight's topic discussion will be a continuation of our first town hall. We're going to welcome all LGBTQ+ individuals to speak about the experiences that they have faced in field placements, in educational settings, in the workplace, as clients, as interviewees, or in whatever situation you feel comfortable with as sharing. The facilitators tonight will be myself, Alice, and Felix. With Alice, feel free to share and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alice. My pronouns are she, hers. I want to thank you all for coming out and showing up in so many ways and joining us for our second town hall. I think we got a lot of interesting stories and ideas the first time, and I hope we can just continue to grow with that. As we get started, I would like to encourage everyone who can and is able to turn on your cameras so we can see you even if you do not participate. Quite often, especially I myself am a trans woman, and for the trans community, quite often our trauma is put on display for others, and it can often be re-traumatizing to talk to a wall of names or blank screens. So it is very helpful for myself. With that, I will pass it over to Felix. And that is okay, Cynthia. I do want to, Cynthia, I apologize. For anyone who can and is able, again, I encourage you to turn on your camera. Felix, take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm Felix. I use they, them pronouns.
Can you hear me? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to welcome everyone here again today. I'm really excited about, the growing number of people who want to come together and talk about our experiences and hopefully leave with things that they are going to do to improve our situations as social workers. I don't know how many people in here identify as allies. If you do, I really encourage you to make sure you're doing things by the next time we have one of these meetings. I do think that we often kind of just like get to listen to queer experiences and like, well, I showed up to this town hall, I'm an ally. We're not going to do that. I am a rather bitter queer person with bitter feelings towards allies. That's not necessarily the greatest for recruiting people, but that's fine with me because I'm not interested in dragging people along. So I'm hoping that the fact that you're here, if you are an ally person, that you're ready to do the work. And I would also argue folks who are, you know, queer but cisgender also have a lot of work to do as well. I think in the queer community, we group in LGBT and then we forget the T. And a trans person, I experience that all the time. So for queer cisgender people, I think it's a great time for you to learn how to really be able to support your trans siblings. And I would also like to echo that for white LGBTQ folks as well. We don't do enough for our QTPOC community members. And I see that a lot of whiteness is part of one of the reasons that we have so much homophobia and transphobia. And I could go really, really far into why white supremacy has its fingers in everything, but I'll do that later because I don't want to just talk my head off. I'm definitely someone who can talk this entire time, but I won't because I would love to hear other people's experiences with trans people and QTPOC to the front or centered, hopefully.
So with that, again, anyone who identifies as part of the community and wishes to speak or share, please feel free to jump in. Possible topics. Last time we had people talk about their experience as clinicians, as employees, as educators, as students. We are all in different places in life, and we all have different experiences, past, present, and future. I see you shaking your head, Eddie, so.
I mean, I'm one of those people who take up a lot of space, so I'm really trying to create space for everyone else, but I definitely have things that I would love to share. I'll break the ice if we need it. It's gonna start heavy though. So, all right, so starting heavy. As someone who is queer and as someone who was a sex worker, that's how I pretty much was able to get my education. I think it's really important that within our profession as social workers, we stop using HIV positive people and trans people and sex workers as weapons to be the litmus test for how, you know, diverse or culturally competent you are. This is constantly happening in classrooms. It's constantly happening in supervisions where it's almost as if the professor or the supervisor will say, okay, well, you're really competent, but you know, what about people who are living with HIV? As if that is a boogeyman, right? Or what about someone who is a sex worker or a trans person? As if we are supposed to be kind of your spectrum markers to discomfort. And so I think it's really important that we address that because what we're doing is essentially continuing to stigmatize these individuals. We're continuing to perpetuate a lot of trauma. You know, having somebody be placed in that position, and we don't know who in the classroom may identify with any of these kind of particular communities. But what we're doing is we are having a lot of ignorance in the classroom because people don't even understand HIV or transness or queerness through the lens that we see it today. They still look at it as if it's the 70s or the 80s, and if you get it, you're gonna die, or it's some, who knows what, social boogeyman. And so I think that while we continue to do this work, we really remain cognizant. And I know that the popular buzzword is always ally. Personally, I'm sick and tired of allies. I think allies are just kind of like, you know, to let my Southern come out like bumps on a log. Like, you don't disrupt unless you feel safe doing so. And when you are pretty much someone who agrees in spaces where you feel safe, but when it really matters, you stay silent, I think it's bullshit. It's performative allyship. And I think that we need to get to a place of accomplishment, right? If everyone is here, whether we're talking about burning down systems, you know, of oppressorship in, you know, the queer experience, in, you know, white oppressorship, you got to push towards being an accomplice to disrupting and ultimately tearing down the system that you benefit from. So that's where I'm at.
I really like that a lot. And I, as a queer woman of color, and I work in higher education, I think the invisible workload affects me a lot, where if it's, we want you to teach us race and ethnicity class, we want you to teach us LGBTQ plus class, all of my LGBTQ plus students, you know, the after hours and all the hours that I spend counseling and supporting students who identify as such. And when I think about dismantling or tearing down systems, one of the things I often think of is the folks that make the decision aren't often in these types of rooms. And so how do we infiltrate those spaces? My partner is a white woman who has a lot of privilege in a government position, and I'm always in her ear about how do you take these conversations into the rooms of people who can make these decisions? How do you change the hearts and the minds of people who, right, can pass down these policies? Abram X. Kennedy talks about how you are not an advocate or an ally or anything, right, unless you can affect policy. And I think that is one of the things that we have to talk about when we talk about dismantling these systems, is how can we get out of our own sort of echo chambers and infiltrate spaces where people really are making some real hammered down decisions.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that, stemming from both of what y'all were saying. Eddie is like a queer person who is a social worker and has also done sex work. I did most of my undergraduate papers on decriminalizing sex work and how the inception of social work was so anti-sex work. Oh my gosh, we could go into that, but I'm not going to. And something that I realized as you were talking about is I had a moment where I did a little presentation in one of my social work classes about decriminalizing sex work. And one of the students in the class, she happened to be a white woman who had a family and like a husband and all of that stuff, just continuous as like, sex work is horrible, it ripped up my marriage, and therefore we should not have sex work. And I tried to like do the work to tell her all of these things, like why decriminalizing sex work was actually is better, and like it has really, none of this has to do with your marriage, I'm sorry. And the professor didn't say anything. And I think that is kind of what connects me to what Christina was saying, is that we have educators who don't intervene at all. And we treat the classroom as like, let's debate about whether or not this is a good thing. But like, my identity is not a debate. And like, by letting these things go, technically they go against our social work ethics, but most social workers I know go against the social work ethics all the time because they uphold white supremacy. And what I'm finding is if I did not exist in that program, no one would be talking about sex work. It wouldn't be part of the conversation. And that's what I think is really unfortunate. And most of our class is white, cisgender humans, and we wouldn't be talking about the things, we wouldn't be talking about decolonization, anti-capitalism, or any of the things that I want to talk about. And it's only because radical students exist. And it should not be on the students to bring these things up, and our professors need to be intervening and supporting these concepts, because right now I say this all the time, we're producing racist social workers in the new generation of social workers. I graduated with racist people. They're starting their careers just like me. And we really need to do something about it.
I have to say, like, I Felix 100% agree. And I think part of the problem, again, is we as a profession really need to develop a backbone. In most other professions, the ethics overlook and supersede the law. But ours doesn't. And what that has created is cherry picking social workers who go to different states and they decide, hey, I can practice in this way because, I can interpret these ethics in this way. And the law says that I can discriminate against queer people or people with certain disabilities or whatever the case, whatever new law will be coming down, because we're only going in reverse. If you haven't noticed, the world is ending, y'all. Get ready. So I really think that on a level of ethics and policy, we need to really push to understand that our ethics need to supersede the law, right? Doctors have that responsibility, lawyers have the responsibility, many other professions do, but ours don't. And if we are calling ourselves agents of change, opposed to being agents of assimilation, where if you really are awake and paying attention, our profession acts as agents of assimilation. We need to change that, because all that we're doing, to Felix's point, is graduating racist social workers, homophobic social workers, transphobic social workers who are problematic and who ultimately just do harm, but hide behind their ethics and hide behind the performative allyship to say, well, I'm a good person because I took a diversity training. Doesn't do anything. Your clients are all, a mess because of you, and then we have administrators who protect that. So without accountability, we really aren't doing anything.
Hi, my name is Casey. So I am in, kind of rural upstate New York, and there's not much LGBTQ representation around here. Hi, Matt. Matt and I went to school together in the same farm town. And, I'm currently going into my advanced master's year. And I had a horrible situation with a professor this year who essentially said that to go into sex work, you have to have a horrible life. Like, it's not a choice. I fought her on that. It was a whole issue. And then in another class, obviously is very misinformed and uneducated, said, listed homosexuals as a race of people who are discriminated against. And we had to end up agreeing to disagree that, homosexuality is a, race or ethnicity. And it was a whole horrible situation. I had, called her out on being, discriminatory and stuff like that. And she did even try to say that gay men are born with physical characteristics that, of, being gay. And it was a whole thing. Like we lost, respect for her and stuff like that. We had to continue through her course. Like, it was a whole problem with this lady. I was happy with my class. They did, there were two that stood up for me. Because she made a comment about me having an outburst. And it was just sad that this woman had just received her master's 3 years prior and, is now teaching this type of stuff. Also, Trump was a rag to riches story, she claimed. So it was just like a whole semester of bullshit with this lady. And it just really was disheartening. Of this is what they're teaching new social workers, in the class and everything. And, we all reported her in our evaluations, but like, this is, problematic. And, sometimes somebody else said they're, kind of tired of being like the token gay. And that's me. I'm the only one who identifies outside of, straight heteronormative, in my class. So it's like I'm the one who has to speak up, and I'm getting tired of it, honestly. Like I saw somebody in the chat say something about being the gay Google. And it's just like, at first I kind of liked being noticed, I guess, by the, oh, we want you to lead this group and this whatever. And it was kind of flattering. And now it's like realizing like I'm the token gay, and learning, how do I want to educate and advocate and teach. Like that's the thing. There's so much misinformation and I want to correct it. But also there's this like line of, I want to be more than just the gay social worker.
Thank you, Casey. I want to take a second on that and just, I'm going to come out and say it. I apologize for my language for anyone else, but it's fucking tiring. I've spent 2 years in this program. Felix and I graduated from the same program. Clearly, there's not only one trans person in this program, but it often feels like it, to the point where administrators are just like, oh, there's more than one of you? Like, clearly there are. So I can agree on that. I want to take a second to highlight some things that were said in the chat. Amy talked about being a parent to a 16-year-old agender, non-binary child, dealing with all of those issues that come up in high school, which, yeah, there's so many. It's unfortunate, and your child is not alone. Someone talking as a queer MSW student, similar issues. I want to highlight an issue here that I think ties back to what Eddie was saying with assimilation. And I think there's a real disconnect when we look at policies and things. We have laws in New York State. We have SONDA and GENDA, which are the Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act and the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act. These things that are happening are not only against our code of ethics and quite honestly derogatory, they are straight up illegal. And GENDA and SONDA both cover all public high schools. Private high schools, particularly religious ones, have really weird exemptions that Matthew could talk more about, especially at the college level, but I'm not even going to touch that. But when even the SUNY system and public high schools are getting away with violating the law, what does the law mean? What does the system do? And I think it goes back to this idea of, someone said it and I can't remember, playing at being an ally. We said it and we put it on the book, but we're not going to actually enforce it. So it doesn't really do anything. And that's super, I don't even want to say frustrating. It's angering to me. And I want to acknowledge and give voice to that anger for anyone else who's feeling it and recognizing it. And I also could keep going on and on. There's a reason I'm pursuing a PhD, so I'm going to step back and let other people talk. But
thank you, Alice. And I will touch on that because I think it's important to discuss the systemic ways that CSWE and NSAW are currently harming LGBT social workers and students, because CSWE is accrediting social work schools that get Title IX exemptions that allow discrimination against LGBT students and faculty. So schools get federal funding to discriminate against LGBT faculty, and so LGBT faculty cannot teach at social work schools, and social work schools are not allowed to have LGBT students. And if students come out as being LGBT at these social work schools, they are expelled and their credits are not allowed to go to other schools. So CSWE is currently allowing that to happen. And there was a school in Pennsylvania, ironically named Karen University. And at the end of last semester, the president said with all of the new NSAW Code of Ethics changes, they were not going to allow the continuation of the social work program because it violated their religion's gender, their definition of gender and sexual orientation expression. And so the NSAW Pennsylvania chapter decided to defend the social work school that exists at this place where LGBT discrimination happens. And it's just mind-blowing to me that this is perpetuated, and it's not something that's talked enough about by our cisgender heterosexual social workers. And instead, it's defended by our cisgendered heterosexual social workers. So we can't be a profession that is filled with allies and agents of change if it's the exact opposite. Because silence is complicity. If you're not willing to stand up to it, then you are just complicit in the action and you're just as guilty of it. And that is the rant that I will go on this evening. So thank you for that.
Hey there. I want to jump in. My name's Steph. So this is sort of like a continuation, like when the schools and everything that you mentioned. I think we need to progress it a little bit further, the role of like social work and then different agencies, and how a lot of agencies that have disseminate services are largely faith-based in certain areas. And it's like navigating through those systems as well. So if you're in an area and it's only this particular agency that's providing services, and kind of the history between faith-based institutions and social work, and how it creates just barriers through there. So it goes from the schooling and into placements, into job placements and all that too.
Speaking on that, I get very worried about how the new Supreme Court decision of the Fulton versus Philadelphia is going to start impacting different, organizations, different policies, who's going to adopt, who's not going to adopt. Like, it is, I was been so scared about this, and we only meet like 6 months on it. And so waiting all that meantime, and then it kind of passing and not even barely even hearing anything about it was kind of like disgusting to me, that, how people are not out speaking against this. Like, how can we deny, love and caring support to children, because of, who the parent's sexual orientation or gender identity. And the worst part is it's not even up to that. It could be other religions, it could be other whatever. It's just so open that we're just limiting all these, these children and potential and families, not even just the children, the families looking to really, adopt or, foster whatever. And it's just, where is it going to go? Is my worry. It starts here and it feels like it's going to keep trickling.
I think there's a real interesting parallel that's coming up in my mind, so I want to share it. As I mentioned briefly earlier, I recently graduated with Felix and got my MSW, and I'm moving forward with my PhD in social work / social welfare. They just changed the name for some reason, but it's the same thing. And something I'm finding that is another system of oppression that's supported and continues is this idea in parallel of religious freedom, of academic freedom. I had a professor who vehemently tried to argue with me that people being transgender was not a research issue and was a complete political issue. That it was political, it wasn't research. There was no research to be done on it. and that I am someone who I don't put up with this stuff. I'm white, presenting, relatively well-to-do. I'm stable, so I'm gonna fight and I'm gonna scream for the people who can't. And I've filed, I believe, 6 Title IX complaints with my school during this past year. Not one of them has led to anything. But I'm gonna keep doing it, so when the next person does, those records are there. And I think I want to acknowledge how tiring that can be for people. And it is okay to protect yourself. If you don't have the energy or the time or the capacity to speak up, you don't have to. But if you can, I encourage you to do so. And if you need support, reach out. If you don't have anyone, you have us now. I will always come to your aid if I can. I'm sure Matthew or Felix would make the same offer, but I'm not going to make it for them. So please understand that this is, we are all experiencing this and you don't have to be alone. I hear a lot of what's coming up in the chat is that community, which I think is another, it's not accidental, it's intentional. Divide and conquer is a very common imperialist European strategy that has now moved into the social worlds. So thank you all for coming together and uniting and sharing your stories. I'm going to stop now.
So can anyone jump in to share? Okay,
Yeah.
so my name's Kirby, and something that I just jumped in the meeting, so I don't know if somebody's already talked about this, but often professors will use the will discriminate against LGBTQ plus students because that is believed to be a safe way to discriminate, and they will, like I've noticed, will try to hide or try not to argue for racism. So like, for example, in my classes, like I've had professors say like, who validate people who are uncomfortable around LGBTQ plus people, but would not say the same for like BIPOC or QT-BIPOC. And I think the reason why is because like our community and intersections of QT-BIPOC have been used as scapegoats for why people who have implicit biases can still remain in the profession, because rather than force people to confront their biases and unlearn them and relearn anti-oppressive approaches, because they attract students who are biased. And so they would rather keep those students rather than change the profession to get new students who aren't biased. And the reason why I bring it up is because when we have professors who are outright anti-LGBTQ plus, they're also harming BIPOC people because our communities share members. And also they most likely subscribe to racist like myths. And so, but it never gets addressed. And it's never like, at least in my like instances that I've seen, it's never outright. And so I just wanted to like warn everyone about that and be careful and like watch out for that. Yeah, that's all I wanted to share.
Thank you, Kirby. And yes, as a reminder, anyone who identifies as part of the community is welcome to jump in at any time. Just try not to speak over each other. That's all we ask.
Hi, my name is Albie, and I'm from Portland, Oregon. And I just graduated my MSW from Portland State University. And as a queer person beginning their career, I'm noticing the complacency of identity politics, and that for far too long, our profession has been really relaxed in oh, you're a white woman, so you can see white women clients, or you're a man, so you see male clients or something. As a queer person entering a tribal mental health agency, I just found it shocking that all my referrals were straight men. And it's like, well, I don't know nothing about that. It's not on just me to respond to a certain community out of assumptions about me. And so I just wanted to make that observation as someone who has just entered the field of mental health.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I would also even go further, like for people who are visibly queer like me, I've made a specific choice to specialize in queer and trans folks. So I want those people in my office. I'm a therapist. I'm practicing as a therapist right now, which is super great. But I have heard people who, you don't want to necessarily always be the gay therapist because you're gay, right? You shouldn't have to practice in your marginalized group because you're the only one who knows anything about that marginalized group. That's ridiculous. Everyone in my agency should be able to take queer people, because it's not like, I often see that queerness and especially like transgender clients are often like viewed as like a specialization that is not necessary for everyone to have. When clearly, if you can't see trans clients, you shouldn't be in the profession. And like that is just that's just that. Fortunately, or I don't know if that's fortunately, but I have decided specifically to go into work with queer and trans people, specifically trans people, because in my area, even though we have a whole agency that I interned at, that is specifically for queer people are having a hard time finding clients. That agency has a wait list that's like months long, right? And that is really, really, really frustrating to me. But the impact, what we don't actually talk about is queer social workers working within the community of queer people. The impact it has on those queer social workers is like unbelievable. I currently moderate my local queer exchange on Facebook. I see some of my clients there all the time. I have to be afraid to go if I've seen clients at Pride events. And that doesn't really happen with like people who don't share such a small community. I'm in Albany, so a lot of queer people call it Smallbany because everyone knows each other, which is really unfortunate. But the idea of having to be in community with your clients all the time is not something that like cishet social workers have to necessarily deal with. They can draw those boundaries, but queer social workers have different boundaries. And I've found that like maybe with supervisors who aren't queer, I have to like, there's like pushback about like how close I am with my clients. And by close, I mean is like I moderate a Facebook group that they're in. Like that's as close as it really gets. But like it's so intertwined and it's very, very hard to unintertwine it. And sometimes those boundaries are like colonialist and white supremacist and all of these social work values that we think about, like this like hard cut difference between social workers and their clients just is physically impossible to maintain with queer clients. When you're queer yourself, living in the same area, like it's just not possible. And that the toll that it kind of takes on queer social workers is something that I find that we don't really talk about as much, and navigating that is like hard. And again, I am like brand new into my like actual practice career after like graduating with my master's, but I'm already feeling it, and I'm already like having to navigate that stuff. Even when there is, I can name different resources for in my community for queer folks, like we all know each other, and it's hard. And I think there's judgment from cishet people about how close we have to be.
I got it. Felix. Ooh, the way that you judge that gospel right there, because it really is. And I put in the chat how, in my experience, is very interesting respectability politics, how they kind of work, right? Or identity politics, how they work like between more progressive spaces and conservative spaces, because in my experience, they're often weaponized regardless of what space it is, but they're used as a shield. So it'd be like, oh no, I'm not doing anything wrong. So like in conservative spaces, like you're a man, you're a woman, you can see each other, you're cool. But then in more progressive spaces, it's like, oh no, I've taken diversity classes, I can see anyone. But under the guise of like this false representation kind of reflection, without taking accountability for the harm that you do when you erase certain groups of people who are oppressed, Black and brown people, queer people, trans folk, out of the kind of work that needs to be done. And so I think it's really important for cis hetero folks to understand that, and white folks as well, right? Non-Black folks, that it's not about you. The work is not about you. When you have a client who is requesting a certain kind of worker, it's not about you to get into your feelings and feel like you're inadequate. Like that countertransference is so high for way too many social workers, and folks need to get it together, because folks just need to see themselves in certain kinds of work. And to your point, Felix, about the need for all mental health professionals or social workers and therapists to be sterile. Like we are supposed to be these sterile environments for our clients. And it is almost impossible for queer folks, because we congregate in the same spaces. And me, one problem that I've had is being a former sex worker, coming into this work, it's like, can't see you, can't see you, can't see you. And certain agencies, they get upset about that. However, this is just the reality, right? When you're working with certain groups of people and certain kind of stories and experiences. But I personally believe that oftentimes that self-disclosure really helps certain populations of individuals. Like a lot of social workers who cannot work with sex workers because they are so uncomfortable, it's like nothing. Come talk to me, right? But to the point earlier, it is exhausting when you're only that kind of person who will only see this kind of client because nobody else wants to deal with it, rather than do the work so that you can see a diverse group of people.
Hi, this is Laura. Can y'all hear me? Cool, thank you. I use she and they pronouns. I'm a queer MSW student at the University of Houston. I wanted to speak because Felix's point about like who is considered a specialty population and who's not, and then Eddie's point about like how social work frames practicing inside and outside of our scope as that being like part of our ethics, was making me just think about having representation in institutions isn't enough, I found, to move, I guess, the needle towards justice, or whatever phrase you want to use. And that's coming up for me because the president of my college, well, I'm sorry, the dean of my college, he's openly out as gay, but LGBT classes are considered like electives at my college. They haven't been taught in multiple years. Like I came into the school and was like, what do you mean? This is in your course list. How is this not being taught? And the queer community that I have like within my college has also said that professors, they've tried to talk to professors and professors will say, well, I didn't want to teach like scenarios on LGBTQ people because I didn't want to rely on stereotypes. And I didn't want to teach on this population because I don't want to rely on stereotypes. And it's just kind of, I don't remember who said it earlier, but I think it goes back to the social work education that we're getting. We have literally professors with tenure who don't think they can teach on really like common populations and who have like gone through MSW programs, gone through PhD programs, and they're still coming out of it going like, oh, we don't know what to do. And that isn't to say that nobody is ever going to be an expert on every population. And I don't think that's an expectation. But I don't like that there's this setup where you can't win either way. And that there's not more emphasis on like, but you can learn. You don't know, okay, but you can learn. And I think that that's the part that always gets me, is just this, like, you acknowledge your privilege. Okay, what are you doing with it though? Oh, you heard about this population? Cool, what are you doing with like teaching about it though? So I'm hoping to find like more sources on how we can move people to the action piece and not just like the knowledge piece. So thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, Laura. And at the end of tonight, I'm going to be going over when our next special, actually, I'll just announce it now. Our next special interest meeting is going to be 1 week from today at 6 p.m. And there'll be an email that goes out to everyone who registered tonight. If you are LGBTQ and you identify as LGBTQ or QTPOC or TGNCNB, please feel free to register. It is only for those people who identify that way. If you are cisgendered and heterosexual, we ask you not to come to the special interest group meeting. In those meetings, we do plan on future town halls and what we're going to discuss, and then we also break out into work groups and plan how we're going to dismantle systems of oppression and actually start working and doing the work, as they say. So those emails will be going out, Laura. So please feel free to come next week if you are available.
Hi, Shannon. Thank you for sharing. I want to highlight something you said in there, and I'm not making an assumption about ages or anything here, but in my school, in my training, primarily a lot of the professors who use what used to be called the golden rule of treat others as you would want to be treated tend to be older, cis, het, and white. And it's been changed. I found that is quite often an oppressive statement, because if you don't live with these identities, for example, if a cis woman tries to treat me how they would treat themselves, it is not the same. So I've found an evolution that works better for me is treat others how they want to be treated, which requires us to do the work to learn how others want to be treated and respected. And I think once we do that, we can't sit by on the sidelines. We will become advocates for our siblings, our friends, our colleagues. And I feel that's where we need to go. And that's where we need to get our That's what we need to do to get our allies to advocates. You know, it's great, and I appreciate people treating me with respect, but if you treat me with respect, but then go continue oppressive practices, it's not good enough. It's double-handed, and it hurts, and we see it, and the people who you think you are allies to are going to see that and know that and stop coming to you. And this is an overall general statement of how a lot of professors in my program have lost me as someone. I won't go to them anymore because I know that they're going to tell me one thing, but when it comes to administration, they're never going to stand up. So it's very hard. I'm going to stop now. Kirby dropped something, and I want to give that space.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add other than like, because Laura brought up like the point about teaching knowledge, and like we just have to find also like unique ways to do these exercises, because I know like when we're practicing like different counseling skills, it's frustrating like as a student to watch like cis het people pretend to be queer and then like work through exercises with their homophobic parents, and like the worker having to like moderate between the two, but then the student not knowing like, hey, when you have parents that are invalidating your existence, like that's a form of, in my opinion, that's a form of emotional abuse, and like that should be something that we teach, but they don't teach that. And so, and I think this even goes beyond just like identities, but also like certain experiences and everything. Like as sometimes in our classroom exercises, we get thrust into roles where we have to pretend to be someone that we're not. And that creates this like arrogance that we would be able to quote understand another person when that's not what we should be learning. Like there are experiences we will never understand, and they're like, that's, I guess what I want to say is we just have to be like we really have to rethink how we do exercises and stuff.
Thank you, Kirby. I want to highlight, you reminded me of something I learned years ago, actually in a state training of all places, but no one took it except for me, was this idea of empathetic isn't really empathetic. It's this idea, this false idea that we can, as an individual, know what another's individual's experiences are. We never really can because we haven't lived their lives. So what we are being taught is this idea of empacentric. It's, I will give you understanding in terms of how I would experience that situation instead of how you actually experience it. And I feel that this is a huge problem in social work schools, but also in counseling programs all over. This false idea that we can ever truly understand another person's experience. And I think this idea might be what leads to queer social workers and queer therapists getting all the queer clients because, oh, you share this one part of your identity. Clearly, that's all you are. Well, it's not. Felix and I are both on the trans spectrum somewhere, but we are not remotely the same person. We have diversified interests. I say that because you're next to me, Felix. And it's just ridiculous. And from a research perspective, there is more diversity within group than there is between groups. And these are just false ideas that make me angry. And thank you, Kirby. I wanted to share that notion for anyone who hadn't heard it. I know I had to sit with it for months, if not years, to truly start to comprehend it.
This is Laura again. To add on to Alice's point, I think one thing that comes up for me too, now that I think about it, is, so I'm a macro MSW student, and it's coming up for me that social work is so ingrained, like institutions are so ingrained in it that there's it feels like there are way less resources for macro social workers. So the people actually trying to change the systems, there's like much less funding. Like we're expected to do all of these. I understand that part of social work is like pro bono work, and that's fine. But a lot of us are in internship placements that are not paid. And the number of hours we're expected to serve is going up. And then there's no like Pell Grants and things like that at the master's level. And it's frustrating that professions, including social work, that are working to change systems are the ones that are getting like the least support. It makes sense because you're trying to change the system. So why would the system support you? But it's also so frustrating. So I'd also be interested if people are aware of resources for macro social workers, and specifically like macro social workers working on LGBTQ issues. Because I'm about a year into the program, and every semester I feel like I'm learning about jobs I didn't know existed. So
Laura, I'm going to put my email in the chat and let's link after this.
I guess I'm curious to know if any, because we've had a lot of academic talk tonight, you know, from my experience, the further we get away from academia, the less we have these conversations. And again, from my experience, I stopped paying for the NASW membership because I didn't find immense value in it. Just with all of the things that I had to pay for, this membership wasn't one of them. And I spent a lot of time in community mental health centers. I spent a lot of time in leadership positions where I was the only of all the intersections of my identity. I'm wondering, for the people maybe who haven't talked, maybe who aren't in academia, what are the conversations like? Like, are people having these sort of these in-depth experiences? I know when I worked in community mental health centers, the homophobia was grand and it was loud and it was clear, right? And so how do we keep bringing people back to the table to say, hey, no, these things still matter, even when you get out of grad school, right? Even when you get out of your studies, these things still deeply matter. I'm wondering how that goes.
Could I make a comment? Hello?
Please go ahead.
Yes. Well, I teach at an HBCU I teach classes for BSW students. And what I noticed that within the last 10 years, there's more of a dialogue around the LGBTQA community. 10 years ago, I would say in class that was not much discussed, because I'm in the Northeast, and in the state of Maryland, there was legislation on the ballot. There was a ballot initiative, and a lot of students, in fact, I had one of the students in my class who were in some of the promos advocating for this particular legislation. But my classes are a safe space, and students are able to comfortably discuss these issues, whereas 10 years ago, not only were students not able to talk about it, but I remember first semester, and I don't mean to belabor the point, in 2002, my first semester teaching, I showed the film Tongues Untied, and I got a great deal of resistance, but that is not the case within the last 10 years. At least that's not been my experience at the university level.
Something that I noticed, I know that somebody, asked about out of academic experiences, all of the places that I have worked, with exception to the one I am in now, and also my internship in which that was specifically full of queer people, like it was queer people for queer people, had a hard time talking about these issues. I was the only person of color, only trans person. It was filled with white women who had a really hard time talking about things. I had to have conversations with my supervisor all the time that she'd be like, well, I don't see color, I just see people. And I'm like, just like vomiting all the time because of what she's saying. And when I tried to do something and I tried to organize an LGBTQ training for free, which by the way, I will never do again. I will never train anyone on queer stuff for free ever again. No thanks. An agency wants me to do it, they will pay me. But anyway, I got a lot of pushback. And part of it is when you're I was working at a community center. When you're a community center, you really, this particular one had a hard time addressing the fact that they were doing things wrong. Like by me saying, hey, I don't feel safe here as a person of color and as a trans person, it meant they had to take accountability and like actually learn. So the conversations that are happening at community centers aren't happening in my experience, so it's anecdotal, because people refuse, especially up high people refuse to acknowledge that the spaces and environments that they've created aren't working. And they haven't had to acknowledge it before because there was no one there to complain about it. Hold on, I have to put my guinea pig away. Anyway, so they, when I did address it, I got a lot of pushback. The executive director was very rude to me a lot. At the end of it, she was not happy and she was the most insecure. And what was surprising is, she's a cisgender woman. I don't know if she's queer, but she's cisgender and she had a trans son. So you would think that a person like this would understand. And unfortunately, she was the most defensive. And I think that is a fallacy in my thinking, that people who are close to trans people would be the most supportive. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. This executive director was the most defensive because if she has a trans son and isn't creating a trans inclusive space, then what is she doing? And unfortunately, the nature of privilege, it creates defensiveness when confronted rather than like accountability and, producing a better environment. So that was really hard. And I think that's kind of where I'm at. And obviously not all community centers are going to be like that. There are going to be people who want to be doing the work. I just happen to be skeptical about it. And then the last thing I do want to say that we don't necessarily talk about in as queer social workers, some of us, you can't tell that we're queer and you have to come out. For example, like I know people who, are cis and then they're like queer in some way in their sexuality, but their clients don't know. And then there are trans people who their clients don't know that they're trans, right? Like asexuality. And technically, you can't necessarily look at someone and guess that they're queer. Like we all know that's true, technically. And you look at me and you can tell I'm trans and you can tell that I'm queer. And it's this level of self-disclosure. Like would you ever be like, hi client, I am queer? Like you wouldn't, your client doesn't need to know that most of the time, right? But by existing, many queer social workers have no choice but to self-disclose. And I think that that's like a really important thing that we don't talk about as queer social workers, and I haven't seen it come up in our meetings or anything like that, is that there are some of us, not all of us, who have no choice, and already have this relationship with their clients and have this relationship with their colleagues around them, in which they don't have a choice to self-disclose something that could be, relatively personal to them, and that cis het people definitely don't go around and be like, you know what, I'm straight. Like we don't have these conversations with our clients, but I, end up having conversations about my gender with my clients sometimes in ways that I wouldn't necessarily want to or feel that I have to. And we don't talk about that in school, obviously, but we don't talk about that in ways to connect with our fellow social workers and our colleagues about it. I think that that's something that we all need to think about. Like some people's experiences as social workers relating to their clients are going to be drastically different, just because I present so like out of the norm or whatever, those are not my choice of words, but essentially, like, I don't have a choice. Many of us don't have a choice, and it drastically affects our relationships with clients and our colleagues.
I wanted to jump in and something that I guess triggered in my mind was the need to understand, particularly if you are someone who is a minoritized individual, and how those intersections overlap, right? The idea of safe spaces really don't exist. And it was put in the chat, but like, just to say it, it's like, safety is so subjective. Even when we think about like anti-racism work, white people have always felt safe anywhere outside of that room. And then when they come in there and they're forced to confront that, all of a sudden it's this hostile place because you have to sit with your feelings, right? So, but I think it's important that when we're thinking about why so many barriers exist is because of scarcity mindset. So many of us who are minoritized have a scarcity mindset because resources have constantly been withheld from us. And when we're doing this work, if you are a minoritized person, it's important to remember, like, if you are not, someone who is in a system of oppression, that like advocacy work is not fame work. We don't do this just because we want, well, some people do it because they want to get the clout on like social media, but it's like, it's not fame work. Oftentimes when we do this work, whether it is in academic settings or whether it is in our employment setting, we are very quickly destabilized. They withhold, whether it's ours or withhold clients or even withhold the job. We're hyper surveilled, we're hyper policed, and very quickly and easily disposed of because we are labeled too much for the agency or whatever the case may be. And I think that if you are someone, particularly if you are in an administrative role and have that kind of power, when the mirror is held up to you to see all of your flaws, because we all have them, I've been very, very vocal about how I am learning to be a better accomplice to my trans and gender nonconforming siblings, because I am a cis hetero person, cis queer person. And there's a lot of things that I don't understand, but it's not my position to kind of like try and debate that, as what was said earlier, right? It's for me to learn and listen and unlearn. And so when that mirror is held up to you, I think it's really important for you to catch when you start to retaliate, because it happens so subtly and it often starts with the gaslighting. Maybe you're perceiving it this way, but are all clients perceiving it that way? Are all queer people who have worked here perceiving it that way? Are all Black folks and brown folks perceiving their oppressions in the same way throughout the globe? And just really become hyper aware of your defense mechanisms when you're presented with the mirror to look at the flaws within yourself in this kind of work.
Hi, can I contribute? I'm Dr. Carol Sussel. You'd asked for some professors. I've been sort of hiding out and, feeling sort of embarrassed for some of my colleagues. who can be so awful. I teach at the School of Social Work here at Adelphi. And 10 years ago, I founded LGBTQ and Allies group because I felt too lonely at the university. I had to find friends and colleagues in my community. And we did that. And I'll try to make it brief. We did that. And I must say, and I don't want to feel defensive about allies, but some of the best people I know are allies who are on our group. And we're networked all over the university now. And I started, we had no bathrooms that were gender neutral. Now we have 44. We have res halls. We have changes in policies. We finally have, you can put your name of choice on your identifying data. I teach the first and only course I know of. It's called Affirmative Practice with LGBTQ Persons. We didn't have anything with LGBTQ. I won't go into all of the stories about having 5 degrees from Adelphi, 3 when I hadn't come out, 2 after I came out, and what I went through. One of which made me write an article called On Being a Lesbian and a Psychoanalyst, the very first of its kind. Can you imagine? Oh my God. I nearly didn't get tenure either. I was once called a white supremacist and told, all you talk about is LGBTQ. And I did, because nobody else talked about it. It was the love that dared not speak its name. I just want to say, and Matthew, bravo to you. You know, you're like the epitome of what we hope our students can become, you know, real activists outside in the world, making change. And we meet every Friday at 2. Matthew wanted to invite you and some of your folks who want to come and share with us, because we are networked all over at the university and we want to recognize the work that you're doing. So we will be in touch. I want to give a big shout out to Ashton, who I know for a number of years, and just much love to you, Ashton. And I will be teaching my class again this fall. It has enough people in it, but it's a small group. I'm very grateful because we can get even closer to one another. I must tell you that in my classes, those are the places where people come out. I'm out. I'm with my wife for 31 years. We're still very much in love, and we drive each other absolutely crazy a lot of the time. But, you know, we're making it work. We've been through all kinds of the S word, you know, stuff. And, but I must tell you that I've been listening most of the time because I want to hear the stories. I need to hear the stories. I need to take it within myself, within my heart, you know, within the pain that I've suffered in my life. And it's been a lot, and there isn't enough time, you know, to tell you all those stories, except that I feel like I've come out the other end. And if you're going to screw with me and with us, go F yourself. Because, you know, we're out there, we're queer. We can get ourselves in trouble. I called one of my closest friends, him, and they're trans. And he really got me for that, because I hurt their feelings. That hasn't happened since, and we worked it through together. And I am 78, give me a break, you know. Still a lot left to learn. But bravo to everybody who's come here, who's doing this work, who's being open, who's providing support for one another. And I was debating, should I say anything? Should I not say anything? And then I said, you know what, Carol? Now we call our group Adelphi Pride. We changed our name from LGBTQ plus and allies to Adelphi Pride, because that's what we feel about the work that we're doing. And making friends, it's where it's at. I'll tell you one last story. We had a new president, and she's walking down one of the streets at Adelphi with the then provost and one of my colleagues in my group. And I shout out to her, hey, hi, President Reardon. I'm Carol Sussel. I'm the queen of the lesbians here. And she's become a really good friend since then, you know, and she works on our behalf too. Not to say it's perfect. It isn't. There's still a lot of work to do, especially in the classroom. But we're doing stuff, you know, and I admire and rejoice in all of you. And frankly, I admire and rejoice in myself that I've had the guts to do this work over these years and take the hits along the way, but still be here. And having joined with you, I thank you very much for doing this and for letting me come into it. And okay, I guess that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Dr. Sezel.
Thank you, Dr. Matthew.
Hopefully soon.
Oh yeah, yeah, please do. We need you.
I had something to say about public mental health and especially the lack of services, especially for Medicaid recipients. I don't know of a single program, therapist, psychiatrist, anybody who advertises as gender affirming or anything like that within my county. And it's horrible. Even they can, you know, we finagled, you know, ways to help them get name changes. But in New York, it's called the Poor Person's Relief Bill, to that, you know, to get the fee waived for the name change. And one alone, just the name of that bill is so disgusting that, you know, when the client told me this, I thought they were joking. I thought that was just like something they made up, and it really isn't. And, you know, I'm happy that there are ways that, you know, I can assist my clients in going through with the name changes and everything like that. But I'm one person. They have so many providers, you know, and there's no teamwork within it. There's nothing, you know, there's some that avoid the doctor because they are constantly, you know, just invalidated and just treated horribly. And it's not okay. And I wish that, you know, especially in some of these rural places, we can get programs, you know, especially specifically Medicaid accepted programs for these individuals. You know, it's kind of known that, you know, there's a lot of teen runaways and stuff like that. A lot of them will age up and come into my program, a program like mine, like an apartment program, and we can't help them. You know, we try our best to help them, but we're one place and there's so many other services that need to learn how to care for everybody and, you know, learn what gender affirming care is and not tell them that because they haven't had a surgery, they're not transgender. Like I'm tired, you know, of constantly having to defend coworkers or technically people within the same field as me. And, you know, I kind of don't actually. But in some aspects, you know, we have to stay quiet, not just rural communities. That's my experience. So I hope, you know, I wish that we, you know, all areas could get it then. Thank you.
Hi, Casey. I just wanted to clarify. I was responding to what Tracy had said above, that in rural countries and communities, adding gender affirming to a private practice bio can drive away business. It's not just there. I used to work at Albany County DSS. I worked in Child Protective Services before I came back here, and the transphobia I experienced within downtown Albany, within businesses and things, it's rampant everywhere. I hate to say it, but it is. I think we often see it in rural communities more. I just wanted to highlight that it is pervasive.
Hi, I'm Ashton. I was also debating. Hi, I was also debating if I should say something, but so I work at a higher education institute right now. It's a private university. Um, I work with first generation students, but I noticed there was this club at a university was called Gay Straight Alliance, and that is not. We don't use that term anymore. I remember when I was still at Adelphi, I graduated from Adelphi in 2017. That's where I met Dr. Sussel, which was a privilege to meet her. But even at Delphi University at that time had Gender Sexually Alliance. And so I wrote this like long email to my supervisor because she's also the assistant director of student activities about, why it's important to change the name from Gay Straight Alliance to Gender Sexuality Alliance, because you can be more trans inclusive and it's not just orientation, it's also about the gender too. But she said that the club is down because there hasn't been a president for the club. So she said that she would like be happy to change the name, but I would have to contact club president, but they're not available. So like, I don't know, I sort of just gave up after that, but I'm wondering, if there's like a new person who wants to change it, I just hope that they'll change it to a more inclusive name for the club. But I mean, I did the best I could. So, but yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you for sharing, Ashton. I want to highlight something I think you said earlier in the chat. You commented, and if you're willing to talk more about it, please jump in over me. But I think it's something that when we think about LGBTQ spectrum, something we often overlook, quote unquote, or don't really talk about is the gray and asexual scale. That's very real and very pervasive and changes a lot of all the coursework and how we live. It's one of the main reasons why I argue against the whole Freudian psychoanalysis thing is not everyone has a psychosexual drive. So clearly it can't be universal. I myself am gray ace, so I appreciated you bringing that up. So thank you for that.
Yes, I could definitely speak more to that. There's this idea called, it's related to it, but it's called amatonormativity, where the society just assumes that, oh, everyone's gonna have a opposite sex partner, they're gonna do the devil's tango and have kids, picket white fence. So you just assume that people will just marry and have kids, but not even in the asexual community, not everyone wants to have a traditional family. So like I had one of my internship supervisors just assume that I was straight. It seemed like she was like, how do I say it? Like okay and like appreciative of me being in the trans community and being queer. She wants to learn more about me, and she doesn't know much about that sort of community. So I was happy to let her know. But she just assumed that she said something like, oh, I hope, like when we ended the internship, she said, oh, I hope that you find a girlfriend that will treat you very nicely. And I mean, I appreciate it, but I'm not attracted to females. Not romantically anyway. Like sexually, I'm not really attracted to anyone at all. And yes, it tends to be like an invisible orientation. And then I can't speak for every asexual person because some people do experience sexual attraction, which is the gray sexual, which is sometimes they experience it. But I feel like for most of us, sex is not like the most important thing. And especially in our culture, at least in American culture, I know of because I grew up here most of my life and I was born here. It's very sexualized. Like even the pop music we listen to, maybe this is going off a topic, but yeah, I don't know, it's very sexualized. And I'm very much sex positive. So, but that doesn't mean like I support that what you call it? I blanked out. Support. Oh, using like contraceptives, safe sex practices, and that sometimes sex work for LGBTQ people, it's the only means of survival for them. So like I have no issues with sex or at all. People assume like, oh, if you're asexual, that just means you're like kind of like a kid or something, or you get, what's the word? Where someone treats you like a kid. It has the word parent in it. I forgot the word for it. I don't. Yeah, infantilized. Yeah, that's yeah. So there's that. But anyway, I'll stop.
Thank you again, Ashton. And what you said, it can feel like it's off topic, but I don't think it is. As in a previous life, before I transitioned, I spent 20 years as a professional actor and a model. So I have some insight into that industry in particular. And I think it's not just our music, it's our whole culture in America in particular is not just sexualized, but it's heterosexualized. It's very normalized, and there's for anyone who wants to look into it more, there's a researcher in California who every year all they do is they do a complete analysis of all media in the US, and they've started including streaming platforms, movies, TV shows, all of that for representation across the board: women, trans, non-binary, ethnic backgrounds, everything. And it's for me, it's nice to see these numbers, but it's terrifying what they come out with. And they're constantly railing about Hollywood is preaching diversity over here and then actually getting worse over here. So I think it circles back to what we were all talking about at the beginning with accountability, holding people to task for what they say they're going to do.
So we can continue if everyone would like. This space will be open for everyone, but for everyone who needs to leave at 7:30, I just wanted to let everyone know that our next Rise from the Ashes, or From the Ashes We Rise town hall will be August 25th at 6 p.m. So we hope that everyone can make that as well. And as well, and I can speak to this, and so can Alice, NSAW New York State is looking for another intern. It can be a remote internship. They are looking for an intern specifically to help with the LGBTQ plus initiatives that are happening at the chapter. And I can attest to that. This internship has been the best work experience I have ever had in my 33 years of existence, but my 17 years plus of working experience. So I will put it that way. So if anyone is looking for an internship, please feel free to reach out to me or to Amelia, who will drop her email in the chat.
I'll talk about it too. I was also an intern and I volunteered at NASW for a year before that. They can't get rid of me even if they tried. So thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Sam, who I think is left, and Amelia, for really, this was our idea that sort of stemmed and came through. So they really are trying to do it. So if you want to make change, it's one place you can really try and be heard. I can't guarantee the change will happen, but as much as they can, they will.
Thank you to all. Thank you. And I also like to have everyone take a collective breath. So I know if everyone's signing off, but if we all inhale on 3, hold for 3, and release for 3, I know that a lot of the conversation we've had tonight has, can be triggering or traumatic for individuals. Sometimes it's good just to have a collective breath and know that you're supported by everyone in the room. So everyone release their breath, and then inhale on 3, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, release, 2, 3. And know that you are supported and you are all loved and you are all valid. Thank you for coming.
That was great.
Yes. We're just doing this. I'm doing the sign of the cross and I'm not even religious. Goodness.
How do you feel? What are your thoughts?
Oh man, I've had a really traumatic week. So it's been like, this was a great day. So I needed this.
I was talking to my partner when I got up in the middle to go to the bathroom. It's really a duality for me. It's wonderful to have the space, but in all honesty, it is so fucking draining to see that it's not just me. On some level, you hope it's just you.
Yeah.
Because then maybe it's not as bad. But no, it's just as bad as we feared. It's still recording, by the way.
Oh. We can all